The Gentleman Highwayman. Few people can have crowded more occupations into a life of 26 years than James Maclean. His father, a Scot by birth, had settled in the Irish county of Monaghan, where the position of minister to a body of dissenters had been offered him. From the first moment of his coming amongst them, Mr. Maclean was much liked by his congregation, who carried all their troubles to him, sure that if he could not help them, he would at least give them advice and sympathy, and there was not one of them who did not drink his health with his whole heart when the minister married the daughter of a gentleman in the neighbourhood. More than 20 years passed away quietly and happily. The Macleans had 2 sons, and the elder one early showed a wish to follow his father's profession, and, at an age when most young men are still at the university, received a call to a Protestant congregation at The Hague. James, the younger, was educated for a merchant, and as soon as he was 18 was to go into a counting house and learn his business. Unfortunately, just before he reached the date fixed, his father died, leaving the youth his own master, for as no mention is made of his mother, it is probable she was dead also. Without consulting anyone, James threw up the post which old Maclean had taken so much pains to get for him, and withdrawing the money left him by the will, from the bank, spent it all in a few months on racing and betting. Of course he was not allowed to make himself a beggar in this silly way without an effort to save him on the part of his mother's friends. But from a child he had always thought he knew better than anyone else, and quarrelled with those who took a different view. Naturally, when the money had all disappeared without anything to show for it, he chose to forget how rude he had been, and expected his relations to support him in idleness, which they absolutely refused to do. At length, not knowing which way to turn, he was glad enough to become the valet of a certain Mr. Howard, who was on his way to England. When he liked, the young Irishman could make himself as pleasant as most of his countrymen, and Mr. Howard took a great fancy to him, and treated him with much kindness. But from first to last James never knew when he was well off, and after a while he returned to his old ways, and frequently stayed out all night, drinking and gambling. In vain did Mr. Howard warn him that unless he gave up these habits he would certainly be dismissed. The young man paid no heed to his words, and in the end his master's patience was exhausted, and one day James found himself on board the Irish boat, without a character and nothing but his quarter's wages in his pockets. Now James Maclean was one of those people who are totally without a sense of shame, and if once a person cannot be made ashamed of what he has done, and always imagines himself to be the victim of bad luck or of somebody else, his case is hopeless. On this occasion he was quite convinced that it was the duty of his relations to supply him with an income, or at least with a home, and when as before refusals met him on all sides, he applied not for the first or even the second time, to his brother at The Hague for help. We do not know what excuse he made for his request, but we may be quite certain it was not the true one. Still, whether his brother believed him or not, he sent him a small sum, probably at the cost of great self-denial, for the salaries of ministers were not high. This money, as was to be expected, went the way of the rest, and again James found himself penniless and reduced to look for a place as a servant. Hearing that a colonel in the British Army who had served abroad with some of his Scotch uncles was in need of a butler, young Maclean went to see him, and was lucky enough to obtain the situation, though he knew as little of a butler's work as he did of a printer's. He was, however, quick at picking up anything that he chose and contrived to keep this place for a year or two, till the colonel discovered that his butler had been carrying out a system of robbery ever since he had been in his house. After a few words from his master, James was once more cast on the world, and had some idea of enlisting in the Irish Brigade then serving under the French flag, and this would have been the best thing that could have happened to him. But as, on inquiry, he learned that unless he became a Roman Catholic he would be refused a commission, he changed his mind and resolved to remain where he was. Well, I suppose there is nothing for it but a humble letter to the colonel, thought James one day, when he heard from a man whom he met at a tavern that his late master was on his way to England. So calling for paper and a pen, he composed a letter to such good purpose and so full of lies, that the kind-hearted colonel really believed he had repented, and offered to take him back, desiring at the same time that James should take his baggage by sea to London, and allowing him £1 a day for his food. It was with mingled feelings of contempt and relief that the young reprobate read his master's reply. "What a fool he is!" he said to himself, adding after a moment, "Well, after all, it is lucky for me. But the Colonel, good-natured though he was, knew too much about Master James to give credit to his stories, and declined a request, made soon after their arrival in London, to purchase a commission for his late butler, with a view to enabling him to marry an heiress. Yet when he discovered that Maclean had really enlisted in Lord Albemarle's regiment of Horse Guards, he consented to give him the £10 necessary for the purpose, which, to keep it the more safely, was placed in the hands of one of the officers. Whether Maclean ever succeeded in handling the money seems doubtful, for as soon as his papers were made out and he was ordered to join the army in Flanders, he suddenly disappeared, and the troopship sailed without him. There must have been something very attractive about this rogue, for whatever desperate plight he was in he always contrived to fall on his feet. And when he thought it safe to emerge from the place where he was in hiding while there was a hue and cry raised after the deserter, it was in the character of a man anxious to start for the West Indies. If someone would only lend him £50. Someone did lend it to him, and it was instantly spent on fine clothes which captured the heart of Miss Maclegno, the daughter of a horse dealer, with £500 to her dowry. This time, Maclean did not dare to throw about the money as he had previously done, but with his father-in-law's eye upon him, he opened a grocer's shop in Welbeck Street, hoping that the fashionable people who had come to live in the big new houses in Cavendish Square might give him their custom. But his wife speedily saw that if the business was to prosper she must look after it herself, as her husband could be depended on for nothing. Therefore she set to work, and for 3 years all went well, and the neighbours said to each other that it was fortunate she was such a stirring woman, as though Master Maclean was a harmless sort of man he was apt to be lazy. At the end of this period Miss Maclean died, after a short illness, and her 2 little girls went to live with their grandmother. Left alone, James neglected the shop more and more, and at length it grew plain to himself, as well as to everybody else, that if any money was to be saved at all, the goods must be sold for what they would fetch. And once sold, it is easy to guess how quickly the gold melted in James's pocket. It was not till he had come to his last shilling or at any rate his last pound that Maclean began to ask himself, what next, after these years of comfort and plenty and idleness? It would be hard to become a servant again, yet he could not see any other means of keeping himself from starving. He was slowly getting accustomed to the idea of seeking for a servant's place, when one day he met in the streets an apothecary named Plunkett, whom he had known in Monaghan. "How now?" asked Plunkett. "Is anything the matter? You look as if you were on the road to be hung at Tyburn." "The matter is that tomorrow I shall not have a penny in the world," answered Maclean, gloomily. "Oh, things are never so bad as they seem," said Plunkett. "Cheer up. Perhaps I can find a way to supply you with more pennies. It only wants a little pluck and spirit. If we haven't got any money, there are plenty of other people who have." Maclean was silent. He understood at once what Plunkett meant, and that he was being offered a partnership in a scheme of highway robbery. He had, as we know, stolen small sums before, but that felt to him a very different thing from stopping travellers along the road, and demanding their money or their life. However, he soon shook off his scruples, and was ready to take his part in any scheme that Plunkett should arrange. "You are in luck just now," said his tempter, who all this time had been watching his face and read the thoughts that were passing through his mind. "I heard only this morning of a farmer who has sold a dozen fat oxen at the Smithfield market, and will be riding home this evening with the money in his saddle bags. If he had any sense he would have started early and ridden in company, but I know my gentleman well, and dare swear he will not leave the tavern outside the market till dusk is falling. So if we lie in wait for him on Hounslow Heath, he cannot escape us." It was autumn, and dark at 7 o'clock, when the farmer, not as sober as he might have been, came jogging along. He was more than halfway across, and was already thinking how best to spend the £60 his beasts had brought him, when out of a hollow by the roadside sprang 2 men with masks and pistols, which were pointed straight at his horse's head. "Your money or your life," said one of them, while the other stood silent, and with trembling fingers the farmer unloaded his saddle bags, and delivered up his watch. As soon as Plunkett saw there was no more to be got out of him, he gave the horse a smart cut on his flanks, and the animal bounded away. All this while Maclean had not uttered a word, nor had he laid a finger on the victim. He had in reality trembled with fear quite as much as the farmer, and it was not till they were safe in Plunkett's garret off Soho Square that he breathed freely. £60, do you say? Not bad for one night's work," cried Plunkett. "Well, friend James, I will give you £10 for your share, which I call handsome, seeing you did not even cock your pistol. But perhaps it is all one could expect for the first time, only on the next occasion you must do better. And you might just as well, you know, as if the officers of the peace catch you they will hang you to a certainty, never stopping to ask questions as to your share in the matter." Maclean nodded. He saw the truth of this, and besides, the excitement of the adventure began to stir his blood, and he was soon counting the days till he heard from Plunkett again. On this occasion a travelling carriage was to be stopped on the St Albans road, and it was settled that Maclean should present his pistol to the coachman's head, while Plunkett secured the booty. But when it came to the point, James's face was so white, and the fingers which held the pistol so shaky, that Plunkett saw they had better change parts, and indeed, as the gentleman inside offered no resistance whatever, and meekly yielded up everything of value he had about him, Maclean succeeded in doing all that was required of him by his partner. "Much good you are," said Plunkett, when they had plunged into the neighbouring wood. "If I had not been there that coachman would have stunned you with the butt end of his whip. You are the lion who was born without claws or teeth. A cat would have been as useful." "Yes, I know," answered Maclean hurriedly, feeling very much ashamed of himself. "I can't think what was the matter with me. I suppose I'm not quite accustomed to it yet." And that very evening, to prove to Plunkett and himself that he was not such a coward as he seemed, he attacked a gentleman in Hyde Park and robbed him of a gold watch and chain and a small sum of money. After this Maclean shook off his timidity, and became known to his brother highwaymen as one of the most daring and successful gentlemen of the road, for so the people called them. Only on one occasion did he run any risk of being caught, and then he took refuge on board a vessel that was sailing for Holland, and sought out his brother at The Hague. "It is so long since we have seen each other, I could not but come," he said to the minister, who, suspecting nothing, was delighted to welcome him, and insisted on hearing the story of James's life since they had last parted. For a whole evening the good man listened to a moving tale, not one word of which was true, except that which related to James's marriage and the starting of the grocer's shop. The minister praised and pitied, and told it all to his friends, rich and prosperous citizens who were proud to invite the fine gentleman from London to their parties. And if at the end of the evening some purses and watches were missing, well, they might have been robbed on their way hither, or have forgotten them at home. At any rate, nobody dreamed for one moment of suspecting their minister's guest. But in spite of all the precautions which, notwithstanding his recklessness, Maclean thought well to take. In spite of his silence respecting his own affairs, and his frequent changes of lodging so that no one might connect him with one particular neighbourhood, he at last put the rope round his own neck by an act of gross carelessness. On the morning of June 26, 1750, James robbed Lord Eglinton in his travelling carriage, and a little later in the same day attacked the Salisbury coach, in company with Plunkett. They escaped as usual, Maclean carrying with him a bag containing several suits of fine clothes, trimmed with beautiful lace, belonging to one of the passengers named Higden. Maclean's first care was to strip off the lace, and to send a message to a dealer that he had some clothes to sell, if the man would call to see them at his address. At the time, the dealer chanced to be busy and could not come, and by the following morning, when he made his way to Maclean's rooms, an advertisement was out describing the garments so exactly that the man instantly recognized them, and gave information to the magistrate. That night the Gentleman Highwayman was arrested on a warrant, and carried to the prison of Newgate, and Plunkett, who had been uneasy since the dealer's visit, and was on the watch, hurried to the coast in disguise and hid on board a smuggler's boat, bound for France. Maclean remained to take his trial, and after first confessing and then denying his confession, was convicted of robbery on the King's Highway, and was hanged at the gallows erected at Tyburn, where the corner of Connaught Square and the Edgware Road now stand. He was at the period of his execution only 26, yet he had contrived to do more mean and base deeds than most rogues of 60.